Hello and good morning and welcome to this live Microsoft Virtual Academy Jumpstart. Today we're going to be taking a look at taming Android and iOS devices in the enterprise using the Microsoft Enterprise Mobility Suite, which is a kind of interesting set of tools that allows us to be able to do multi-device management. Going through the course of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to be introducing ourselves, who we are, saying a little bit about our backgrounds. Then we're going to take you through what we're going to cover in the course, take you through some of the technology that we'll be using to help enable iOS and Android. And then we're going to actually get into giving you some access to be able to do this at home yourselves. We really, really want you to be able to go home and try this out, be able to go and get hold of all of this technology to be able to give it a go. Obviously, that doesn't mean that we're going to be giving you an Android device or an iOS device. That's going to be something you're going to have to bring it yourself, probably just like your users are doing. However, we are going to give you all of the Microsoft tools to be able to set up your own lab and be able to understand everything. We're also going to show you exactly what to do with those tools in order to be able to set up that lab. So, without further ado, let's get on to who we are. I'm Simon May. I'm a technical evangelist at Microsoft. I specialize in looking at enterprise mobility and the Enterprise Mobility Suite, along with Windows as well. I've not always been a Microsoft technical evangelist. Before I joined Microsoft, I used to work in the real world, and I have a little bit of an idea about what you guys are going through. So hopefully some of these tools are going to have some real world capabilities. It is all the stuff that I think really matters to us. Going forward as well, I'm also going to introduce my colleague, Kevin Remdy. Kevin is also a technical evangelist at Microsoft and is going to be taking us through a whole chunk of this course. Kevin,
right.
Welcome.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks. Well, yeah, a little bit about myself as well. I also am a technical evangelist with Microsoft. I've been working in IT at first as a software engineer and then into IT management for quite a number of years, 11 years with Microsoft now, focusing, as it says on the slide here, with Microsoft IT and cloud technologies in mind. Okay, well, I think we should get into our course, shall we? Enterprise mobility. Really, I mean, this has to do everything about what Simon just introduced. How can we support our users with bring your own device? So we're going to talk a little bit about, in this first section, the toolkit and some of the introduction around the topic. Well, what is this really going to mean for us, for our businesses, for our, and ultimately our end users being productive? We'll talk about some of the fundamentals of the topic. And then briefly introduce managing iOS and managing Android. These are our 4 modules today. Now we're going to be delivering these modules in 50-minute sections. We're going to take about a 10-minute break between each. We're not going to have a chance to get some lunch in today. Unfortunately, during our live event, it does go over the lunch hour for some of us today, but hope you'll stick with us and come back after the 10-minute breaks and go into each one of these sections as we get through it, okay? Okay. So what is enterprise mobility? What is the Enterprise Mobility Suite, and what's the whole reasoning behind Microsoft supporting this so deeply in the products that we have? Well, there's a workforce that is mobile today. I mean, this is really, really the reason behind this whole thing. It is a top enterprise mega trend. People love their mobile devices. They really want to be productive wherever they are, however they're connecting. And you know, it's an interesting stat actually that people are in surveys have said they would rather give up caffeine, give up chocolate, give up alcohol, and other pleasures before they give up their mobile phone. That's how attached they are to these devices. So it's really important that we support them because they want to be mobile, but they want to be productive. You know, by 2016, 350 million employees are going to be using smartphones in their businesses. 200 million bring their own devices, and these are all studies that have been done by many governing bodies. 95% of information workers using their own, or at least one of their own self-provision devices, self-purchase devices. That means they're buying that device. They have a choice. They buy the one they want. They're bringing it to work, and they're expecting you to support them. And that's, of course, the tricky part. Nearly 8 in 10 workers spend at least some of their time working outside the office. That's a pretty huge number. And we all, again, we're not necessarily tied to our desks anymore because we have the benefit and the flexibility of mobility. That means we are going to be wanting to be productive wherever we are. 1.2 billion smartphones and tablets are going to be shipped in 2013. That, of course, is last year. 70% of all devices sold in 2012 were mobile devices, mobile-capable devices. So it's a big, big trend. And it is the new normal. It's just incredible that people want to be able to work where they are, use device for their own purposes. As says on this slide here, 25% of all software will be available software as a service delivery by 2020. The employees that typically work on employer premises, so few, 33% are the ones that stick around and sit at their desk all the time. The rest of us, all being mobile with the devices that we have.
Of course, one of the really important things about this is actually that when we look at this slide, we've got a whole bunch of information here about software as a service as well. What are software as a service applications, and why do we think about that in the context of mobility? Well, honestly, it's because if we look at the way that applications work today, particularly around mobile, they're expecting software as a service based delivery of applications. And part of the reason for that is that the application architecture for mobile just changed. It now became a place where actually we tend to work in a RESTful way. We'll send some information off to a web service or a cloud service, and then the device is going to expect some information back. But it's not going to have a synchronous communication with that kind of that application. That's what we would have seen in an on-premises, maybe a pre-cloud days client-server environment. But now we expect with devices to be able to send something and have it come back. And that's because of the disjointed nature of communication with mobile devices. Sometimes you get onto some kind of public transport, a train, an underground system, and actually you lose connection to the network, the internet, the cloud. So you need applications that work in that interesting way. Of course, the problem that we face as IT guys trying to deal with mobility is actually the fact that, frankly, there are so many of those applications out there, trying to secure them just becomes a huge headache. And all of our users have actually now got into a situation where, in order to get their day job done, they don't just need one password to get onto Active Directory, they need 40 passwords. They need to be able to get onto Active Directory. They need to be able to get onto their CRM application. They need to be able to get into their storage. They need everything else, and it's much more difficult to secure. So that's why SaaS applications come into that particular view. Another interesting point there as well, on the slide we actually show the number of people that are actually being using and working away from their desks typically.
Yeah.
I've actually seen a study on this, and I can't remember the numbers, but it's kind of around 50% of IT guys are actually working away from their desks on a regular basis. So you guys out there are probably one of the biggest culprits for flexible working and mobile working. You just expect for that to be possible. And obviously when I was in IT, it's one of the things I expected. I was at the cutting edge. I always wanted to be using the latest technology. You guys are probably exactly the same. You're probably like me. You probably have like 5, 10 different devices that you log onto all the time. So you know exactly what your users are trying to do. It's just a case of you need to maybe get some good tooling around it.
Well, then that's the point, and you mentioned security as well. I mean, with more freedom comes more risk. Mm-hmm. It'd be easy enough to say, here, use whatever device you'd like. We're going to let you connect up to the network, connect to the resources, connect to the applications, copy data left and right, and that'd be all great if we could trust everyone, if our company data wasn't always in need of being secure. And so it's the same world we've been living in for years, securing our information. It's just now we have a new Wild West of information that's going outside of our borders, outside of our networks. And so we're putting our own data and indeed even our own businesses at risk when we start opening it up just to anyone who comes in with their own device. This has to be a trade-off, and it's a trade-off between security, weighing the security risks, and also the agility and the productivity that we can help provide our end users with their devices. And that's a fine line. I mean, that's a real balance, this tightrope that we have to walk between agility and security, and protecting the company content while we are allowing our users to be productive. Now this picture on this slide here is actually a picture from one of Microsoft's security center. This is actually the place where it all happens and where security is a first-class concern. We have people actually watching, monitoring, and making sure that the data that Microsoft is using, the data that Microsoft employees have access to, the products that we support, publicly and privately, are being secured in this security nerve center. Microsoft takes it very seriously, and we have tooling and technologies that we can help provide to you to help you better enable your security, and even in the new mobile-first and cloud-first world that we're working in right now. So when we're thinking about this layered approach, we need to consider the different layers of security. We have the devices themselves. These are the devices that people are carrying with them. It's that iPad that my boss brings in and wants to gain access to email, to the corporate VPN, to the Wi-Fi networks, and so on. But even beyond that, it's not just about locking down applications or devices, it's actually locking down the applications as well. The applications have to not only be provisioned by the organization, considerations around applications that are allowed for employees to have but no one else, considerations around how the applications are provisioned to those devices, even those devices that may not be company owned, and then also the files. That's the third piece of this. So these three layers, not only the applications, but the data that they use, the files that they save, the files that they transfer. If I receive an attachment in email and that attachment is secured in some way, then I shouldn't have the ability, even on my personal device, to save it to that local device if the policy on that file says I shouldn't do that. Or a policy on that file actually says, no, you have to be, you can't forward this to these people. Or, hey, you can save it up to the cloud and even put it in your friend's Dropbox. But you know what? No one is going to have access to that data unless they are the properly credentialed person or people that have access to that document. So we have the ability, and this is what we're going to be covering in the remainder of this session today, to cover all three of these layers, all the devices, on the application side, and then indeed on the files themselves and on the data that they protect. And along with this, I should mention also identity. Because part of this is going to be knowing and to be able to know who is accessing those applications, who's using the files, who has the ownership of that device. Is it the company or is it the person? And based on that information, based on some identity, and ideally a common identity, we can grant or deny access to certain resources. Now that's a very important point as well as far as security goes, because if it's a user that that has moved to another department, well, based on their role in the company, it should maybe tweak how their access is provided. And oftentimes it's not necessarily just about usernames and passwords. Some of what we're going to talk about today has to do with the identity of the device itself. And having capabilities to actually do multi-factor authentication, to actually be able to provide resources to our users in a way that says, yeah, I know you know your username and password, but I need to trust that you are you based on the device you're using. And the first time you use this new device that I don't know about, I might ask you a little more information. I might send you a phone call and ask you to press pound in order to verify that it was indeed you, because I know your phone number, I called you, that is coming into this resource. Once I have that, well, now you've registered your device. You basically said, this device is mine, and in future it can be used as one factor of authentication. And that's to the knowledge of the device, the access to then the applications that require that sort of multi-factor authentication, or access to the data based on that as well. So all topics that we're going to go into more detail on as we get into today. So this is a combination of technologies that we're going to be using to make this happen. As an example, we certainly can support the ability to secure documents and manage documents in technologies and tools such as Office 365. And we have a suite of tools, a suite that is to help with the licensing of all the different components. And we'll talk about the different components as you see here on this slide with regard to Intune, System Center Configuration Manager, and Rights Management Service, and Azure Active Directory. These are all tools that can be provided as a part of a suite called the Enterprise Mobility Suite. I think this slide actually does a good job of kind of outlining or laying out some of the kind of a summary of the different tools and technologies that are a part of this. Again, leading to protecting devices, protecting applications, protecting data, knowing the identity of the user, and giving or denying access to those resources based on who they are.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really interesting about this slide is on the left-hand side, we've got that kind of the stacked approach to enterprise mobility. So the very, very base, you need a product that's going to be able to protect not only your mobile devices, but your existing estate. You can't just protect the mobile stuff and hope that the existing estate is going to kind of manage itself. Yeah, we've all been managing that for a number of years. So what we've tried to do with the way that we've built the products inside of Microsoft is actually make it so that the traditional products that you know, that you love, like Configman, actually integrate with things like Intune. And why have we done that? Well, the architecture of Intune completely redesigned to make it so that actually it's going to be completely globally cloud scalable. So you don't have to build it yourself. If you were going to build the infrastructure to deal with, potentially in your company, 3 times the number of devices that you've had for desktops, that'd be serious investment and it would be really hard to build. So we tried to make that a little bit easier. Take the familiar, build on it with the power that we have from running things like the Azure cloud. So as a result, that means that everywhere that we've taken anything and needed to extend it, that's exactly what we've done. We've taken the on-premises stuff that works really well, like Active Directory. We've extended it up to Azure Active Directory. Thus, we've kind of moved the edge of your network, if you like, up securely into Microsoft Azure. It's a kind of cool approach, and it's one of the things that we've been uniquely placed inside of the enterprise mobility environment to actually be able to do. No other vendor really runs a cloud at the kind of scale that we run Azure at, right? It's a pretty huge thing. So being able to leverage that, kind of cool.
Definitely. So in our next piece of our conversation, we're talking about some of the trials that you can start with and some of the easy ways that you can get started with this and the technologies we're going to be talking about today. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Simon. He's going to give us a quick demonstration. I think we're going to talk about getting some trials on Office 365. We will add Microsoft Intune to this, and then on our slide we also see some links that you can take advantage of, some aka.ms links to get the free Office 365 trial, the Intune trial, as well as Active Directory Premium, Azure Active Directory Premium, as a functionality as part of Azure Active Directory. And setting up a trial for that is also very simple. So,
yeah, and we're going to turn a bunch of that on. That's going to be the thing. So this might seem a little bit strange to walk you through signing up for a bunch of trials, but actually it makes it a lot easier if you do them in the right order in order to be able to build a lab environment.
You're connecting one to another, so it makes
absolutely
sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense to do that. It'd be nice if there was a you could just click a button and say I'd like these 3 products. There's a little bit more to it than that. We all know as IT guys that actually deploying this stuff can take a little bit more intelligence than that. So think about this as maybe adding roles and features to Windows Server. You're going to add the few roles that you need, and then you're going to customize them as you go.
Right.
So for a start, I've gone to that very first link on that PowerPoint slide. We'll make that available for you a little bit later on, but it's aka.ms/Office 365 E3 Trial US. So the reason for that is actually it starts me off with a United States language. I'm going to pop in my name and my last name, pop in an email address here, and I'm going to pop in my company name next. Let's call this iOS Android MVA1. And I'm just going to pop my phone number in here, but so you guys don't all start calling me, we're just going to flip away from the screen for a second so that I can just do that. And I'm going to hit next. Okay, now it wants me to create a user ID. So in this case, this is going to be the admin ID for my Azure Active Directory tenant, in essence. So I'm going to enter admin, because it's kind of quicker to type in than administrator. And then I need to provide my company name. I'm going to type in iOS and Android MVA 1. Now, when you're typing in your company name, don't use your real company name. What will actually happen in that case, let's try 3. What will actually happen in that case is that we will create an Active Directory tenant for your company. So if you are Contoso.com and we create the Contoso.com Active Directory, nobody else is ever going to be able to take it, which is great. It also means that you have to remember the admin credentials for your trial. So if you're doing this for your company, and you're not doing it as an official trial for your company, you're just doing this to learn some skills as an IT pro, you'll want to think about the way that you're actually signing up for this, just to make sure you're doing the right thing. I'm going to just type in a password, though, to move us through this. And then I'm going to hit next. Oh, let's confirm the password. Okay, and again, I'm going to just confirm my phone number, so we're just going to move away from this screen for a second. And we're going to hit text me. So it's now going to send me a text message. Let's add in my area code. It's going to send me a quick text message. That text message is going to include a code, and that unique code is going to be something I can just pop in. We're actually using multi-factor authentication to make sure you're a real human being at this particular case. You don't need to provide any credit card numbers, but we do need to make sure you're not a robot. It's one of those things, we have a little bit of a problem. We don't like lots of robots running all of our environment. So let's just pop in my authentication code. And we'll hit free account. Okay, so it's now creating my account. That's all it's going to do. In a couple of seconds, it's going to come up and say, hey, you've created an account. There we go, it's ready to go. So I'll hit the ready to go button. In the background, now Office 365 is going to start provisioning all my services like my Exchange, my Link, my SharePoint. I don't need to wait for that, so I'm going to go to aka.ms/Intune trial. hopefully. Actually, Kevin, can we just switch back to the presentation for a second just to confirm that URL?
That is Intune trial, yes. Oh, well, this might have a misspelling on the slide here. Intune T-I-R-A-L on the slide. I don't think that's what you meant, though.
Let's just give that a try. T-R-I...
T-I-R-A-L.
T-I-R-A-L.
Or we can Bing it and find the trial that way.
Yeah, let's just do this try Intune. That's exactly what we'll do. We'll just Bing it and try the trial that way. This one here. Super simple. You come to the page, the very first thing that it says is sign up for a trial of Intune. Okay, now we don't want to sign up for another trial. We've already created an Azure Active Directory tenant in the background. So what we actually want to do at this time is actually just click sign in. Little link right at the top of the screen. So then I'm going to say, hey, you're already signed in. I know who you are. So let's just add that trial onto your account. And continue. And that's it. We're done. We've now got an Office 365 tenant that also has a Microsoft Intune tenant attached to it as well. So now we need to go one final step, and we're going to go across to Microsoft Azure. So I'm going to go to manage.windowsazure.com. And now what I'm going to do, I've created an Azure Active Directory tenant in the background there. What I now need to actually do is go and get hold of that tenant and turn it into an Azure Active Directory Premium tenant. Now, if you have a credit card number associated with your Office 365 account, you don't need to do this step. You can just go in and use the admin credentials to access Office 365, to access Azure AD. However, we need to have some kind of chargeback mechanism in place somewhere. So we need an active Azure account now in order to be able to go and just take over ownership of our Azure Active Directory. So here I'll just type in my username, which is hit continue. Type in the password. And then this is going to take me into my Azure Management Portal. Now the very next thing that I'm going to do is go down to New at the bottom left-hand corner. I'll actually let the page load up very quickly first. I'll go down to my existing Active Directories. And what you'll see in here we go, I can manage lots of different Active Directories from one single Azure subscription. So you can see that I've done this more than once. But let's go and add a new subscription. Go into New, go into App Services, scroll to the bottom, and there we see Active Directory. And then we're going to go and select Directory. Now we hit Custom Create, and we changed from creating a new directory to using an existing directory. And then we go through this kind of slightly strange process. I'm ready to be signed out. So we'll say, that's okay, sign out. It signs me out. Hopefully we'll get a continue screen, back to the Azure sign-in screen. What I now need to go do is sign in with my the account that I just created inside of Office 365. So the admin at iOS, Android, OID, mva3.on.microsoft.com, and the password that I just set up, and we'll hit sign in. Okay. Now it's saying we've got hold of the account. We need you to sign out again and sign back in with your management account. So we'll go do that. Hit continue. Ready to be signed out. Back on with my Azure AD. With my Azure subscription. Type in my password. And it's taken me to the access panel. So we'll go back to manage.windowsazure.com. Now if we scroll right down again to our Active Directories, when this gets populated we should see the iOS Android MVA directory appear. I'm guessing it's going to be, let's try this one. So let's see if there's any users in here. No, there's not. This is the one that I'd literally just created. So it gives me the account, makes it available to me, so I can now start to explore Azure Active Directory and see everything that's inside here. Whilst we're currently in the portal, let's just do that very quickly. Let's just have a quick look through an existing tenant that I've already set up, an existing Azure Active Directory. We'll do that for this account here, Fake URL USA. This is an account that I use for lots of the demos that I do, so it's one of my other lab environments. Here we can go into users and we can see a bunch of my users that are syncing from my local Active Directory, and also some accounts that are managing this account, which are Microsoft accounts, and it also has some cloud-only Windows Azure Active Directory users. If we go across to groups, we can see that it's pulled up my groups from my on-premises environment, my local Active Directory. If we go to applications, you can see that I've already connected up to some software as a service applications in order to be able to provide single sign-on to those applications directly from my Azure AD creds. We'll hit domains. Domains lets me take a publicly accessible DNS name like contoso.com, or in this case dx.msftlabs.com, and replace my company name.onmicrosoft.com address with something that's maybe a little bit more familiar to my users. Hopefully that's going to match the user principal name or UPN of your users in your on-premises Active Directory. This next pivot along, directory integration, this lets me say how I'm going to be working with my on-premises directory. It has the maximum turn on here, the activated, deactivated master switch, and it also allows me to turn on some other options for Active Directory. This master switch can also be set from inside either Office 365 or inside Windows Intune as well. If we go to configure, well, this lets me set more of those master settings across my entire Azure Active Directory. So you can see the green button here, so I can go and customize my branding. I'll hit that. And what you can see is that I've actually got some additional languages set up inside of this tenant. So if you're coming in from a machine which is configured to be in the Netherlands, well, you're going to get Dutch as the language that you see all of the Azure Active Directory branding in. If I scroll down a little bit further, you can see that I've actually got users enabled for password reset. So all of my users can actually use Azure AD as an easy self-service point to be able to do a verified self-service password reset. That means that in order to do a password reset, they're going to have to receive one of those phone calls or a text message to identify themselves as being a real human, but also that they really are who they say they are. And then scrolling down a little bit further as well, the authentication methods. We can also say whether users need to keep signing back in to the access panel. We can set up custom email addresses for our administrators. And we can turn on notifications. So this is going to tell you if you've got users whose accounts have attempted to be breached. We'll have a look at that in reports in a second. You can configure multi-factor authentication here. So for every user account that's moving up into Azure Active Directory, we can very quickly, with about 3 clicks, turn on multi-factor authentication so that, yes, every time they sign on, they too can receive a phone call that says, hey, are you a real human? Are you who you say you are? Well then, yes, we'll let you in. A little further down as well, we have options for device registration. We'll be covering that in a little bit later on. Group management as well, self-service membership for groups. So you can create groups where users can actively opt themselves into the group. And then finally, the application proxy. This essentially lets you take an on-premises application, maybe your intranet, and serve it up securely with single sign-on through Azure Active Directory to any of your users who you've decided should have access to that application and are enrolled in Azure AD. So that's a very quick overview of the configuration panel. Reports is kind of cool. It lets us see where our users have been signing on from. Have they been doing something they shouldn't have been? So let's very quickly have a quick dive into one of these reports. Let's have a look at IP addresses with suspicious activity. Here what we'll see is that we have no anomalies in the last 30 days. Let's go back to another report. Let's try multiple geographies. That's always good. There's normally some reprobate that's been signing in from multiple locations around the world. And there is our reprobate. Heidi, just down the bottom here, she's had some interesting things occur with her account. So in this case, we can see that she went between, say, Zurich and Frankfurt. That was supposed to take her an hour to travel between the two. It took her a minute as an IT admin.
She's fast.
Yeah, she's fast. I'm also a little bit worried about Heidi, and I probably want to have a conversation with her about how quickly she's doing that. She may have invented time travel, so I might need to actually be monetizing that in some way. However, it's more likely that somebody is attempting to break into her account. From reports, we can go to licenses. And this is the very final thing. We actually need to do this on our other account. Here you can see that I have my Windows Intune trial licenses. enabled. I've got 25 units and I've assigned 5 of them. You can also see on this next line down that I have 100 Azure Active Directory Premium licenses and I've assigned 11 of them to this tenant. However, we're working with a different tenant for most of our demos. So I'm going to go back to my new tenant down here, this one here. Just confirm, yep, it really is the one I want to use. We'll go across to licenses. And then just down the bottom here, you can see the last trial we need to activate, our Azure Active Directory Premium license. We just say yes. And then 100 licenses for Azure Active Directory Premium, all of its capabilities like the rich reporting that I just showed you around being able to show you where your users are logging on from, what devices they're logging on from, audit reporting, all of that starts to be enabled for your tenant. But not only that, we can also go and configure things like for our multi-factor authentication, we can change the voice messages so that your voice messages don't say, welcome to the Microsoft Authentication Service, they say, welcome to the Contoso Authentication Service. The kind of things that really build up trust for your end users. There's a whole bunch more stuff that we'll go through a little later on in this session, but that demo takes you through some of the overview of what we can do with Azure Active Directory.
So Simon, go back to the user list for just 1 second, if you would. I'm curious about how you populated that list, because it looks like you have, as you said, some local Active Directory, it says, some Windows Azure Active Directory, and there's some different account types there. I know that we're going to be talking about it in just a second here, so maybe we should get right into that. Let's talk about some of the tools and how they get set up, how you made some of those connections, how you were able to get those, well, first of all, those users into Azure Active Directory that maybe were originally populating out of your Active Directory in your data center.
Yeah, sure. So across on my demo environment here, you'll see that I've actually got another piece of software running. This is one of the things that we can do with our on-premises environments to connect them up to Azure Active Directory. Everything we've designed allows us to work in a hybrid mode. So this is a new service that folks may not have seen before. This is called the Azure Active Directory Sync service. And you might be familiar with something called DirSync. If you've used Office 365 or Windows Intune or Microsoft Intune at any point, you might already be familiar with those. Azure AD Sync is kind of the new, improved, on steroids version of DirSync. And what it allows us to do is take our on-prem users and synchronize them up to the cloud, but it gives us more control than we've ever had before over exactly what's happening. So I'm going to enter some sign-in details here. So I'm going to enter the admin credentials for one of my other tenants. So we use Azure admin at, let's use iOS, Android, MVA 1, let's use 2 in fact, .onmicrosoft.com, and we'll just type in the password for that tenant. So I'm using the global admin credentials for my tenant, which are the details that I entered when I did the sign up for Office 365 just earlier on. Okay, that's going to go through the process of authenticating the account. We don't want to make you go through anything to do with setup without making sure that we've cleared some of the gates. So these things are going to happen. It's just going to authenticate against Azure AD. And
again, this tool was free. I mean, it was a free tool that you installed on one of your servers in your data center. You have authentication. You know the credentials, first of all, for your Azure Active Directory account, or you should, it looks like. And,
yeah, hopefully.
And you also have the authentication to, or the ability to connect to your local Active Directory. So you have those credentials in your pocket right now as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I have both sets of them. I'm going to use 3, which is the one I just set up. And hopefully this time it'll work. There we go. What's going on? Wow, that's annoying. What's going on? Okay, let's just check that we can get to the internet.
That's a good step.
Always a useful thing to do.
While you're troubleshooting that, why don't we talk about some of the basic setup of what we're going to be describing now as we go along here. What Simon is doing right now is he's connecting up to his Azure Active Directory. He's connecting his on-premises Active Directory using the AD Sync service. After that, we're going to be actually talking about System Center. We're going to actually be showing how System Center Configuration Manager can be configured and actually connected to Intune. So we can use Intune to do mobile device management, or we can use System Center Configuration Manager plus Intune to do that. We won't have 24 to 48 hours to actually wait for some of the tools to download into Configuration Manager, but that's okay. We'll talk about those and where those apply and some of those extensions as they are available to us. As mentioned, Simon's working on the synchronization of Azure Active Directory, populating Azure Active Directory from his local Active Directory.
So just a second.
How was your URL there? Was it?
Yeah, I think
the main you had on that user account, everything. It's
yeah,
pretty long.
It was a little strange.
Okay.
I think I probably was entering some details there slightly incorrectly. So we're going to just do this on my backup server. It's always good to have a backup.
Very good.
So we're just going to wait for the directory sync service to wizard to start. Okay, so I'm just going to do a very quick fix here, and I'll explain why this quick fix is necessary in a second. There we go. Go into the task scheduler, and let's just disable that for a second and minimize this. Okay, so
yes,
yeah, need to do
this
that.
one too. Yes,
yeah, that's a fun little thing that we need to do. So one of the things that we've improved with Azure Active Directory Sync is that now everything runs as a service, and we also use scheduled tasks in order to be able to take all of the records from your on-prem environment, move them up into Azure Active Directory on a scheduled basis. We now use the task scheduler for that process, or I'm finding it really hard to say scheduler, by the way. It's scheduler in UK English, and it's kind of tricky for me to keep getting through that loop. So inside of the task scheduler, that's okay. I'm hopefully localizing myself better. So inside of the task scheduler, what we can see is that there's actually this task has now been set up to run every 3 hours and to repeat indefinitely. Previously, that was kind of hidden inside of what happened with DirSync. So we've taken it out of that hidden place and made it much more obvious. So I've now typed in the details for my existing global administrator account, and we're going to hit next. Hopefully this is going to work. Okay.
There we go.
So we're actually running this through on a server which has been pre-configured by me to talk to one of my lab accounts. And what you can see is it's automatically picked up the corp.contoso.microsoft.com forest. At this point, I can actually enter another forest and the administrator username and password for that forest. We've actually now got the ability to sync multiple forests back to Azure AD. So that can make some things very easy for you. If you've got one company that's taken over another, say Contoso has taken over Fabricam. Before that process took place, it's quite likely that Contoso sent some employees over to Fabricam, and Fabricam created new user accounts for them. So those employees now have accounts in 2 separate locations. Rather than creating federations and federated trusts between the two, what we can actually do is just put Azure Active Directory above that, and then we can resynchronize the accounts inside of Azure Active Directory. It makes for a much easier way of being able to manage users across multiple forests.
So greatly improved over the old DirSync tool, for sure.
Massively so. You couldn't really do that easily with DirSync. That was a huge, huge problem to be able to go through. So we listened to that feedback. We're actually going to make it so that you can pull in different identity sources as well. So you can pull in an LDAP if you need to. So the next thing, because we're going to do some matching of users potentially across multiple forests, we need to say how that's going to work. In this case, I'm just going to go with the defaults of using the object GUID and the user principal name. So next. Now we can say optional features, and I love this thing. This is very cool. So we can now say we're going to do an Exchange hybrid deployment. That means that we're partway through an Office 365 migration. We have some on-prem Exchange, some Exchange in the cloud. We're also going to turn on password synchronization. There's a couple of deployment option choices, and we'll get to those later on. We're going to turn on password write back. Again, we'll get to that a little bit later. And we're going to turn on Azure AD app and attribute filtering. I just want to show you why. If I click next, one of the things that we can now do is say, I'm only going to use a very specific subset of the Microsoft applications that are based on Azure AD. So I only want to use Intune, for example, for what we're about to do. And I'll say next. This then tells me exactly which attributes we need inside of Azure AD for Intune. And the reason that this is quite cool is because I can actually tick that I want to further limit these. And what we'll see is there's a few things that are still grayed out. Account enabled. A little further down, source anchor, and user principal name. One of the things that people have always kind of said to me is they're a little bit unsure of whether they should store their identities in Azure AD. Well, this is really useful for that, because actually you now get the attribute level decision making over what gets stored inside of Azure AD. So if your security guys are a little bit uncomfortable with one of your Active Directory on-prem attributes being synchronized, fine, don't synchronize it. Maybe you've got a custom attribute that stores social security numbers or some kind of very specific personal information. Just don't synchronize it. There's no need to. And this now gives us the ability to turn those things off. We'll say next. We're going to enable password write back. That's a change for this setup. And we'll hit configure. It then does the negotiation with Azure Active Directory. It turns everything on, turns off anything that needs to be turned off, and then it will finally go through the process of doing a sync and sending everything up to Azure Active Directory. So that kind of takes us to the end of setting up our lab with Active Directory sync services. You can get Active Directory sync services from within the Azure portal, from within the managed.windowsazure.com portal, and then you'll be able to get hold of this stuff. So that takes us to the end of that. I've forgotten what the next thing is.
Actually, I'm hoping we have time. We have about 5 more minutes left in this first session here. But do you have time to show us how to connect Configuration Manager to Intune?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go ahead and do that. I've completely forgotten that that's what we needed to do. So the next thing, I've got a pre-existing setup System Center Configuration Manager 2012 R2 Lab. What we're now going to do is go through the process of just making the initial connection up to Microsoft Intune. Which you can see, still inside of the UI, it's still called Windows Intune. We need to get a CU out there, a cumulative update to fix that. So we're going to say add Windows Intune subscription, and then we're going to click next. Then it wants us to sign in. Well, we've already created our subscription a little earlier. I'm going to hit sign in. Now, once I've done this, my Windows Intune or Microsoft Intune account will be completely turned into an account which is managed through Configuration Manager. So if you want to, some of the exercises we're going to do a little bit later on in this jump start, some of those are going to be done directly through Microsoft Intune as a standalone product. Some of them are going to be done through Microsoft Intune connected in this way. So in this case, I'm going to say, yeah, that's fine. I might have a couple of different subscriptions to make that happen. Again, I get a sign-in screen. You know what? I'm going to type in my global admin creds again. And we'll hit sign in. Okay, that's it. We have signed into the account. The sign in button has gone grey, which is the hugely intuitive way of telling us that it's now time to move on to the next step. Sorry, I'm British, I do sarcasm a little bit. We'll click next. Next we have the collection option here. Now we need to set a limiting collection inside of our Configuration Manager environment. Only people inside of this limiting collection will be able to enroll devices into management, so that's something to bear in mind. Because I'm building a lab, I'm going to use all users. It's kind of okay for these purposes. We need to provide a company name. And
while you're typing that, I'll just say, yeah, I've seen people do, create a security group and then maybe create a collection in Configuration Manager built on, or dynamically built based on that membership in the security group, and then that's how you can then create a Intune users group. Absolutely, yeah, and that's a really great way of doing it, bringing it into Azure, into Active Directory for management. It really helps you to integrate everything. Then we're going to say a site code. In this case, it's going to be my primary site for my Configuration Manager environment, so we'll say NYC. Then we need to say which platforms we're going to support. Now, each platform has its own requirements for management. The requirements for Android are really lightweight. The requirements for iOS aren't so much, and we need to go off and get a certificate. We'll do that a little later on, just to walk you through that process. However, at this time, I'm going to just set things up without going through any of the requirements for the individual operating systems that we're going to support. We'll say next. We get to provide the phone number of a contact in IT. Let's say what the details are inside of IT, who you should contact. This is all information that your users will see through the various portals. We'll explain what those are that they're going to see. We can also provide a company logo. I'm going to use this massive pink swathe. I think it sets us up for knowing exactly what's happening and where. And then we're going to finally confirm those settings and make the change. And hit close. Now, it gives us a warning here telling us that we're not really done. There's one more step that we need to go through. And again, we're IT guys.
This is stuff that we have to think about. That's why there's a wizard not doing all the work for us. We now need to determine where we're going to have our synchronization point inside of our configuration manager hierarchy. So I now go down to Site Configuration and go to Sites. I can right-click my site and add a site system role. I'm going to next through these first couple of screens. Then when we get to select the role, we can select Windows Intune connector. One of the things you can't do is actually set up the Windows Intune connector until you've added your Windows Intune or Microsoft Intune subscription to your config-man hierarchy. So next, and now we've set up the on-premises connector, the synchronization service that will synchronize everything between Intune. So if something enrolls into Intune, it's going to get passed down to config-man. If something is managed from config-man, we're going to then pass that up to Intune so that it can make the connection out to our endpoints to make the configuration happen. So that's the end-to-end setup of configuring Intune. The one final thing is there's an item here for extensions for Windows Intune. It'll change to extensions for Microsoft Intune at some point, I'm sure. This extensions area will populate. This is where you're going to see the ability to manage iOS 7 and 8 will appear in here. The ability to manage, say, Windows Phone devices will appear in here. The ability to manage email profiles will appear in here. But this can take up to 48 hours for it to run through. So you do want to kind of configure your lab environment when you've got a bit of time, do it while you're having a lunch break one day, and then come back to it just a couple of days later, and you'll find that you'll have extensions inside of this area. I'll show you how to enable those extensions a little bit later on in our Jumpstart.
We'll talk about some of the reasons why we even have those, because I think it's really important to note the reasons behind that. So
you're absolutely right. It's incredibly important to know why we've gone down the route of building extensions versus, I don't know, pushing out a cumulative update.
All right, super. Well, then just to recap what we've talked about today, we certainly wanted to introduce you to the topic of enterprise mobility and the enterprise mobility suite and what the different tools and some of the initial setup that can be done. Certainly when we want you to take advantage of the trials, so we gave you a good walkthrough of those, where those are found, and some of that initial configuration that you'll want to do, some of the order for that, and some of the reasonings behind the different accounts that you set up. And then the setting up of the tools as well. Whether you're going into Azure Active Directory and want to configure the benefits of multi-factor authentication as driven by Azure Active Directory, whether or perhaps you're going to be connecting to your Intune trial to your configuration manager installation, your subscription there, and then eventually driving the mobility management, mobile device management through configuration manager and using Intune as that connecting point. All right, sound about right?
Yeah, let's just deal with a couple of the Q&A that we've picked up as well here. I just want to say to Martin and DeVito, thank you for that. I wish I'd seen your comment as I was going through there. Hey, I was doing a live demo and I didn't read the screen. Great point. I actually didn't turn on Azure Active Directory Sync for the account that I just created, the iOS Android MVA3 account. Should have gone in, turned on Azure AD Sync. Thank you for that. There was a great question asked by Angie Reagan, I think. Can you sync one forest to multiple Azure Active Directories? Well, actually, yeah, you can. It causes some interesting side effects if you try and do it. Users being able to sign on is going to be interesting because they're actually you're going to get into a situation where in order to be able to sync multiple forests, you're going to have multiple UPNs for each user. And each user is going to have to, because only a UPN can only exist in one Azure Active Directory. So that's going to cause a little bit of tricks to work around it, but it is possible to do. What versions of Configuration Manager will work with Intune? From Peter Hotchkiss. You have to be on Configuration Manager 2012 SP1 in order to be able to use Configuration Manager with Intune, or rather Intune through Configuration Manager. Sadly, back in 2007, we hadn't even thought of the idea of Windows Intune at that point. So, and certainly most of the devices that we're now managing, they just weren't available. So you do have to move to ConfigMan 2012 SP1, preferably to 2012 R2, to be honest, with all of the latest cumulative updates in place to make your management life a lot easier. And there's tons of guidance on exactly how to do that as well. In fact, I think we've even got an MVA course on how to do that. Do you recommend moving away from DirSync to Azure Sync from Ben Watt? Well, Actually, that's beginning to be the guidance. It depends on exactly what you're using DirSync for. You need to go and have a look at some of those reasons. But yes, we are starting to say it's time to start moving over to Azure AD Sync, particularly if you want the capabilities around attribute filtering, or if you want to do multiple forests, you really kind of need to be thinking about moving over to Azure AD Sync.
I would also say then the ability to pull from other directories, as you mentioned, LDAP support,
absolutely,
other sources to be able to populate that directory, or even a CSV file for that matter.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We really do need to be doing that. And there's a few other changes coming down the line as well, so they'll be along very soon. Okay, I think that takes us to the end of this module. We're going to give you guys a 10-minute break, and then when you come back after that break, we're going to be going through some of the fundamentals that you need in place in order to be able to manage iOS and Android. So we're going to have a look at maybe moving through some of the stuff we need to do with config man and Intune.